Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome in this third episode of the Fleet Week Commercial Fleets. My name is Steven Schroefs. I'm the editor-in-chief at Fleet Europe, and I will be the moderator of today's webinar. Today, we have a learning webinar supported by LeasePlan, and we are very happy that one of the biggest leasing and fleet management companies is supporting us during this Fleet Week. And we will talk about successfully migrating to an eLCV fleet. An interesting topic, of course, because fleet electrification is on top of mind of almost every fleet manager across Europe. And so it will be interesting also to see how you can manage your LCVs in an electrified way. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar of the Fleet Week is part of our complete Fleet Week that we start organizing on Monday, the 26th of April. Each day we organize an exciting webinar where we deep dive into the specifics of LCV management. And so today it is with LeasePlan. And here on the screen you have all the other supporting partners: Elcd Automotive, Fleet Logistics, Geotap, Sixt, and Webfleet Solutions. So, the topic of today, ladies and gentlemen, successfully migrating to an eLCV fleet. As you know, managing a conventional LCV fleet can already be quite a challenging task. Now, eLCVs can make life for the fleet manager even more complicated. Think about driver profiling, charging infrastructure, range anxiety. There are plenty of factors where fleet managers have concerns about. But that shouldn't stop you from considering building an eLCV fleet. And that is exactly what we are going to learn in today's webinar supported by LeasePlan. Ladies and gentlemen, the information given in this webinar is for information purposes only. So should you want to reproduce some of the information for yourself or for your company, then please know that you need to inform Fleet Europe and LeasePlan beforehand to make sure that everything is fine and that you can. Now it's time to introduce our expert speaker. And I have the honor to welcome Mark Lovett. He is Group Head of Commercial Vehicles at LeasePlan, and he knows everything about LCV management as he is managing the commercial vehicles unit at one of the biggest leasing companies across Europe. Mark, welcome in this webinar.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you.
I hope that you are doing well, and it's great that we can have your support and the support of LeasePlan, of course. I know that the topic is really on top of mind of many fleet managers, so I'm sure that the audience is eager to know your story. So what I'm going to do is to stop sharing my screen so that you can upload your presentation.
Perfect. Let's give that a go.
Yes, we see already the presentation. It's now in full presentation mode, so everything is fine. We can see you still on the camera, and your presentation is on screen, so this means that you have the webinar floor. I will mute myself and also put off my camera so that full attention is for you and your presentation.
That's great. Many thanks. Thank you, Stephen. So good afternoon. As Stephen says, my name is Mark Lovett, and I'm the Group Head of Commercial Vehicles at LeasePlan. It's my pleasure to be with you all this afternoon at this Fleet Week event, and specifically this afternoon, talking about transitioning to an electric LCV fleet. We hear all the time that the future is electric. The reality, however, is that the future for LCVs or vans is now, and we don't want any of you to get left behind. 2030 sounds a long way away, but it's actually less than 10 years' time. And if we all think for a moment about what we were doing 8 or 9 years ago, we realize that time flies and we must all prepare for 2030 right now. As we approach 2030, we will see significant changes in the LCV industry. Indeed, we're amidst it already. As we head rapidly towards 2030, we all have to contribute to building a sustainable future. And within that context, we will see more of a focus on the ban of fossil-fueled vehicles, new legislative changes coming in around the where and the how we operate our LCV fleets. And we can also expect an increase in the number of new innovative products coming to the eLCV market. As it happens, we're seeing that already with numerous new manufacturers that are designing and building electric vans from the ground up, not simply adapting existing ICE vehicles to become electric powered. So much of what is written in the press today about sustainability in passenger cars applies equally as much to LCVs. As I mentioned just now, the manufacturers are stepping up to the mark, and we're seeing a whole new influx of technology and innovation in the eLCV products coming into the market. Numbers work, by and large, or at least the gap between ICE and electric parity is getting much, much closer. But it's also dependent on how and where and over what period the LCVs are operated. So what about eLCVs? Sustainability in fleets applies to passenger cars, trucks, buses for sure, but also LCVs. So let's embrace the rise of the electric LCV. When we talk about electric vans today, we mean they are powered either entirely by electricity or, in a few instances, they're a mix of electricity and a fossil fuel. And whilst electric LCVs represent a relatively small share of the overall LCV market today, they are undoubtedly growing in popularity. In the UK alone, we all know that due to COVID and its impact on the economy, 2020 van registrations were down versus 2019, but electric LCV sales were up over 60%. And this phenomenon is being replicated across other European countries. Talking of significant growth numbers, our industry and financial experts expect almost 60% of LCV sales in China, the US, and Europe to be electric by 2040. That's a staggering prediction that we can't ignore. I talked earlier on about significant change in the industry by 2030. And one of those changes is sure to be what I refer to as an explosion of eLCVs. I use that somewhat dramatic phrase, exponential growth, but that's what it is, an estimated 10 million electric LCVs on our European roads by 2030. We at LeasePlan are being approached on an almost daily basis these days by our LCV clients to seek advice from us on moving their ICE LCVs over to electric vehicles. It's really clear that LCV fleet operators have a genuine desire nowadays to move to eLCV for a number of reasons. Firstly, LCV fleet operators, especially the corporates, have a significant impact on total CO2 emissions, and electric light commercial vehicles are one of the best ways to combat climate change because A, they produce less CO2 emissions, therefore they're a great solution for low emission zones, and of course, electric LCVs support companies' sustainability and corporate social responsibility policies. We find that companies want to electrify their fleets, but they have concerns over how they implement and transition the eLCV fleet. They have concerns about their digital readiness for electric within their organizations, And there's a perception by many fleets that the purchase and the monthly costs for eLCVs is too high. We believe, however, that if fleets follow a simple transition plan, many of these fears can be allayed. Essentially, it's all about getting the groundwork right, such as carrying out a full eLCV feasibility study. Excuse me. It's important that fleets look at the feasibility of their potential eLCV routes. This leads to a secondary study, that of route optimization, and of course, the need to plan how to optimize the required charging infrastructure. It's also important to invest in online training of eLCV fleet managers and drivers. Do not underestimate the importance of education, because a different driver behavior and a different mindset is needed to work with an all-electric LCV fleet. At LeasePlan, we call this the suitability assessment. It's a relatively simple format. Know where you want to get to in terms of your fleet eLCV utilization. Know your starting point today, analyze the gap or the gaps, and from that, you have the recommendations on where and how to start to transition. I always say that a transition of the entire LCV fleet is probably not the best thing to do. Plan and phase your eLCV transition based on your organization and your current LCV fleet operating model. So, what are the key elements of a successful eLCV transition plan? You need to review your existing LCV fleet and identify the potential fleet vehicle options. Look at those future eLCV products that are coming to the market within your time frame. Carry out a TCO, or a total cost of ownership exercise, and importantly, learn from the trailblazer fleets, the eLCV pioneers in our industry, or the front runners. And we'll be hearing from one of those in just a short while. I believe that a successful eLCV transition plan is based upon 7 fairly simple steps. Number 1, do that benchmark exercise. Number 2, gather all of your operational requirements of your LCV fleet. Collect all of the data that's out there and build some scenarios. And then update your fleet policies to include your selected eLCV vehicles. And when you implement your plan based on those previous steps, do it in a steady PDC way. And by that, I mean allowing you to finally review and amend your plan on an ongoing basis accordingly. Ultimately, a successful eLCV transition is all about working towards getting the right vehicle, the right choice. What's the view of the climate group EV100, of which LeasePlan is a founder member, on the bigger picture when it comes to electric vehicles? Well, we know we all need to act, and we need to act now. The EV100 members, of which there are over 100, are making firm commitments to switch their fleets to EVs and or install charging points for their staff and or clients by 2030. Has your organization done the same yet, or does it have the same ambitions? If you haven't, you need to start doing so. The EV100 wants to see an industry-wide improvement. At LeasePlan, we have an approach that facilitates that transition to eLCV for our clients. We believe that we have all the right credentials to accurately tailor an eLCV transition plan for fleet operators. I've set out today the landscape for transition, and we're obliged to advise our clients on the right route to take. We know the positive impact on the environment, and so we stay close to our clients on every step of that transition journey. If after today's webinar you're interested in learning more about how LeasePlan can help your LCV fleet transition to electric, please let me talk further to you about our program, the tools, and the implementation plan. In the meantime, I thank you for joining the webinar today, and I'll hand you back to Stephen from Fleet Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for the insights. Really great that you could share how important it is to switch to an eLCV fleet, but also the roadmap to do so, and also the fact how LeasePlan can support fleet managers across Europe in making that switch successfully. And as Mark Lovett of LeasePlan has mentioned, we thought that it would be a great idea to also invite one of LeasePlan's customers who already switched to eLCV to a little bit comment about the expectations, the do's and don'ts, and give you some tips and tricks. Now, you can also yourself, attendees, ask your questions to both Mark Lovett and our guest speaker by asking your question via the chat function in our tool. At the end of this webinar, we will have a Q&A together with the experts, and I will moderate the most interesting and the most important questions with our experts. Let me now invite our customer. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Garrett Bridgeman with us. Garrett, hello. I hope that you are doing fine.
Good afternoon from sunny Dublin.
Okay, so
well,
everything is fine in Ireland?
It's good. So the weather's good and things are looking up. So
okay, perfect. Thank you very much for being with us. Perhaps the first question is to introduce yourself. Who are you? What is your role? What is your company? And how many eLCVs do you already have today?
Yeah, so you said my name is Garrett Bridgeman. I'm the managing director of the Irish Post Office, so the postal system. So we would deliver all the parcels, over 2.1 million letters and parcels every day to every home and business in the country. So we're obviously, we have a huge fleet. We've one of Ireland's largest fleet of over 4,500 final mile vehicles. And we have over 1,000 EVs that we've rolled out over the last 2 years. So we've we went through a lot of the pain, we've went through a lot of the experience, and we've got a lot of advice to give people.
Okay. When did you start implementing eLCVs?
So obviously, like many people with large fleets, we've been looking at piloting various vehicles over the years. But really, about 2 years ago, as part of our sustainability program, we really set out in earnest to have very, very ambitious targets and aspirations in terms of EV. So we started about 2 to 3 years ago, and we set out with the ambition of having all electric vehicles in all our cities by the end of 2020. And that's okay. How the process started. So okay. Yeah, and about 25% of our fleet now would be, 28% actually would be electric.
Yes, but so the goal is to have 100% of your LCV fleet electric by the end of this year.
In our 4 cities, yes. Okay. So we have one of them, 2 of them complete, and we 2 which were just complete, but the slight COVID issue has delayed issues there. But we're the first capital city in the world who has all electric in its city centre for a postal company.
Okay. In what circumstances or application do eLCVs make sense for your company, for your organization?
Yeah, well, I think with, we all have obligations and we all have, sustainability goals. Our goal is to be carbon free by 2030. And, where it makes sense is to, we have to move to an EV fleet. From our figures, we omit 24,000 tons of carbon a year with our existing diesel vehicles. for every one electric vehicle you replace it with, you're removing 6 tons. So, we've removed 6,000 tons of carbon in the last 2 years. So, makes sense to start in the cities, absolutely. And because obviously, with standard electric vehicles, the range can be about 400 kilometers. But when you're working off an EV fleet, from a network management point of view, obviously you'd be working off something around 100 kilometers per route. So I'd start in the cities, absolutely, in terms of rolling it out.
Okay. And how has LeasePlan supported you in building your eLCV program and switching to those eLCVs?
Yeah, I suppose it was funny because again we were one of the front runners in Europe in the postal industry for rolling out electric fleet. And when we went to LeasePlan a couple of years ago, we gave them very ambitious plans. We don't have left-hand drive vehicles either. It's right-hand drive. So we wanted 1,000 electric vehicles, and we wanted them kind of now. So that was the challenge we gave them. But they've been a great support to us. And I think what's been great is, we're not stuck in with one supplier. So we've got Nissans, Mercedes, Renault, LDV. So we have a full range. So LeasePlan were great support for us in relation to that. And we also sourced Ireland's first electric trucks, which were good when they're expensive, but they're good. So we've got 3 rigid trucks as well. And that was in order to give us the full electric in our city centre, because obviously you've got big pickups that you need to make that you can't do in an electric van.
Mm-hmm. What I would like to know is LeasePlan supporting you on the finance, the funding side and the service side, or were they also consulting you in choosing the right vehicles? Are they also there if you have questions about charging, how to deal with drivers, etc.?
Yeah, LeasePlan would offer a managed service for us, so they would help manage the fleet. They would offer consultation. They'd help us source the vehicles and assist, obviously, in the charging. And the one thing I'd say to people is that the charging is a big area to, I know there's a lot of fleet managers and network managers on the call here, and you're used to dealing with trucks and vans and, diesel and servicing and all that. When you get into electric vehicles, big learning for us was, yes, we ordered 1,000 electric vans, but you have to order 1,000 chargers, and they come from completely different suppliers. You've got different critical paths and all the rest of it, and you need the chargers there for the fans that work. So that was a big learning for us, is to work on the critical path to ensure that those chargers that you have in place, that the critical path of the arrival of them fits in with the arrival of your vans, or else you'll end up with an electric van sitting in a port somewhere waiting to be used.
Perhaps a question to Mark. Mark, how important is it to have early adopters like Garrett to also be able to develop expertise around those eLCVs within your organization, but probably also things that you can share with other customers?
Yeah, I think Stephen, it's really important. I think that, as I alluded to in my presentation, there are a lot of fleets out there that are really keen to test the water with electric LCVs, but because of the perceptions that are out there in terms of it, and Garrett has touched on some of these here, I think it's really encouraging for fleets to see that other fleets have kind of bitten the bullet and gone for it. So, the point that I said about, learn from the front runners, it's almost like a bit of peer endorsement, that if you're another fleet that operates a similar number of vehicles as yourself, has kind of gone through that journey, then it's almost not just the leasing company or the fleet management company that's telling you that you should do it. You're actually able to draw on the experiences of people like Garrett and other fleet managers that have adopted electric LCVs to kind of help you through that journey, in addition to the kind of support that we can offer. So I think taking advice and following the lead, but having a dialogue with the front runners is really important.
I think one of the other things as well is, why are we doing this? And our purpose and our the reason that Postal is here is to serve the Irish people and to and our sole goal is about, we need to do the right thing for business and for the Irish people, and it is the right thing to do, electric vehicles. And, I think that whilst it is the right thing to do and it's good for the environment and we're looking after the planet for generations to come, I think regulation is going to come down on this, and it's going to come fairly quickly. We're involved in a number of working groups in Europe-wide where, capital cities are going to bring in regulations. It might be this year, it might be next year, where they'll only allow electric vehicles. And, so from a regulatory point of view, you may need to do this and have it, and it's good to have those learnings. I think that, big learnings for us. Yes, electric vehicles are more expensive to go to the board with, and I had to go to the board looking for 1,000 electric vehicles, which are significantly more expensive than 1,000 diesel vehicles. But when you look at the longer term, the running costs are 6 to 8 times less than a normal vehicle. There's less wear and tear, less moving parts. You actually use less tire usage, believe it or not. But no, you're not changing gears, you're not getting them serviced. The resale value of them is significantly higher, and will probably get even more higher when the regulations come in. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. It's not just about the P&L and looking at the capex of a straight diesel versus an electric. You need to look at the longer term.
Okay. I would like to ask a follow-up question regarding charging. You can imagine that this was not only for you probably a certain challenge at the beginning, but also for some fleet managers here in the call. The question is, how does a postal service manage the complexity of charging of 1,000 vehicles? Is it centralized? Is it decentralized?
No,
is it all at once? Is it all at once? Do you have planned time slots for your people?
Yeah, so basically we have 120 sites, operational sites. And if we go back to the old, the original setting up of post offices worldwide, it was a postman, invariably a postman at the time, but a postman with a bicycle. And, you didn't need big, car parks and stuff like this. So our learnings are, in the modern postal world, you've got postmen and women leaving from a number of depots. You need to have a big yard, and you need to have space for the chargers. And what they do is you park them up in the evening time, or 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. You charge them, and you come back in the next morning at 6 o'clock, and they're ready to go. I think one area, and I don't know whether some of your people on the call who manage fleets, one of the areas we have a concern with, and we're still working through it, is we have a number of staff who would garage their vehicle at home. So when they finish their work, they don't bring it to a site, they bring it to their own house. So what kind of solution do you do there? And do you get someone a charging station in their own home? And how does that work and all that? So that's a small little thing that you need to be mindful of as well. But again, it's the small things that can get you,
Okay. There is a question regarding, and I think it's perhaps for Mark, regarding Europe and the fact that we are not one country, of course. Which country is leading the way when we talk about eLCVs and the eLCV transition? And can you perhaps also share some elements regarding which government initiative would you take from one country and have in all, if you would be, let's say, the man who could decide that this is the way to go forward?
Yes, I think it's a really good question, Stephen. And I think the way we look at sort of how ready for electric vehicle adoption are certain countries in Europe, we have to base that data based on, or we have to use the data that's based on our own fleet findings with our own clients. And there's certainly, the countries like Norway. Norway, we have a very, very high proportion of our LCV fleet is electric. And we also have a high proportion of electric LCVs in the Netherlands. And I think really, although we're seeing rapid improvement in country readiness, if you like, for LCVs, I wouldn't say that it's all being driven necessarily by the government subsidies. And the reason I say that is that, to Garrett's point, the reasons that I sort of set out in my presentation, that we need to, and we will have to embrace electric LCV adoption, is for all the reasons that we've talked about in terms of the impact on the climate, the environmental issues, etc., the legislative changes, and all of those things. But we have to bear in mind that government subsidies will not always be there, and they won't always be consistent. So I think it's a bit dangerous in a way to compare one country's government support with another one, because even in one country where there is a currently fairly favourable subsidy program, that can be switched off almost overnight. And we've seen examples of that in the UK, for example, quite recently. So so I think we have to almost make a decision that we want to adopt electric vehicles onto our fleets for all of the right reasons. If the government subsidies are there to support it, that almost becomes a bonus. But I think very much it's about taking everything into context, and that was what I was talking about in terms of this whole feasibility study. Use all of the data that's out there in your local market to determine, how and when to transition your fleet to electric. I mean, I don't know whether Garrett has any comments on sort of how influential the government was in his own market in terms of going with electric.
No, I think they weren't. I think obviously the government has its sustainability goals, and we'd obviously align ourselves with those, but we weren't forced into it, or actually the opposite in terms of the incentivizations for us in terms of financial from government was very small in Ireland. It's very good for private citizens, not good for business, especially a business of our size, because you reach a certain cap, and very few businesses are buying, 4,000 electric vehicles, which we're in the process of buying over the next 2 to 3 years. But if you're buying a couple of hundred vehicles, the grants are very good, but you run out very quickly. But I think, as Mark said, you do it for the right reason, and the right reason is for the climate, and the right reason is for our kids and our kids' kids. Interestingly, a point that I didn't cover was that one thing that we noticed about the rollout of the EVs, which you mightn't think is kind of, you'd imagine, is that there was a big increase in staff satisfaction. They prefer driving electric vehicles. They feel it's more relaxing. It's more, if you're spending 7 hours a day driving a diesel van, and the noise and the changing of gears and all that kind of stuff, they find it much easier and more relaxing driving an EV, which is a nice thing to find out after we rolled out.
Okay. Another question that came in, one for Mark. How does the RVs of LCVs compare to the RVs of passenger cars? Are you seeing on the market that those RVs are more favorable for LCVs than passenger cars? Are they both stable? What is your vision?
It's a difficult one to answer, really, Stephen. Reason being that there is far more maturity in the used electric passenger car market than there is in LCVs. I mean, to put that into context, I think the passenger car market has been, well, I would say probably has at least a 5-year kind of advantage of maturity than LCVs. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it would be sensible to compare residual values of electric LCVs with electric cars. It's a very different market. The passenger car market has completely different criteria and characteristics to the LCV market. So I would say that that we wouldn't go about setting our residual values on electric LCVs based on anything to do really with the electric passenger car residual values. I think that for LCVs, because it's relatively early days, we look at a lot of organisations that are probably, those front runners, people like Garrett and the Irish Post, they're front runners, but they probably only had vehicles for about 12 months. So it's it's quite early days, and so a lot of our projections for RVs have to be based on how we see the future demand for electric LCVs going. And I think based on what you've seen and heard earlier on today, and probably what you've seen and heard from other of the webinars this week, the demand for used electric LCVs in 3, 4 and 5 years time will be high. So I would say it should be a positive picture for residual values for eLCVs, but we wouldn't really do very much comparison with the passenger car market, just because the market's different and the age profile is very different.
Okay, I have a question for Garrett. Garrett, from what you answered in the beginning, we could have the impression that the choice to go eLCV was mostly driven by sustainability and ethical goals.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we are living in a particular situation already before cost efficiency was crucial for many corporations. I can imagine that this has even been accelerated with the pandemic for many organizations. Is it also a cost-efficient exercise for your company, the switch to eLCVs?
Yeah, I think, yes, in terms of the our sustainability goals, we have 5 sustainability goals, which climate action is one. We also have sustainability goals around decent work, around responsible communities, responsible consumption, and innovation. So sustainability is wider in our sense than just in terms of the climate action. So, but I suppose when we look at it, the running costs are more efficient for EVs, and I think that is part of it. But there is a larger capital upfront investment. But would I say it was a primary reason for doing the rollout of EV was there, cost efficiencies? I wouldn't say that was the primary reason for doing it.
Okay. Would like to go to Mark. Mark, a question that popped in. How do eLCVs lease rates compare to the comparable ICE lease rates?
Again, it's a good question, and it's very much dependent on age, mileage, and term of contract. I think it's fair to say that in certain instances, the electric LCV can look to be more expensive and have a higher lease rate. But that can certainly be offset in terms of that whole total cost of ownership piece when you look at the kind of reasons that Garrett has cited as to what made them really make that decision to go electric. Sometimes it's not solely down to cost, but there are instances, if you look at certain manufacturers and certain models, where we have been running quotes for our clients, where it is absolutely possible to be flexible in that term and mileage to find an eLCV lease rate very, very comparable to a diesel equivalent.
If I could just say, sorry, go ahead, finish it. Are you finished?
No, I was just going to say,
yeah.
The only thing I was just going to say is that if you were to say, for example, this is a quotation that we have been given for a diesel LCV, can you give us the equivalent quotation for an electric vehicle? It would probably become, or it'll probably be evident that it will be expensive. However, if you gave us the option to say, let us work a particular quote around that vehicle, and we were able to maybe be more flexible with either the duration of the contract or the mileage, whatever it may be, then and put other sort of issues into play, it is possible to come up with a reasonably comparable LCV rate. Sorry, okay.
Garrett.
I think there's one important point in this as well. I think if you look at the EVs, right, and what we look at what's happened with the even the younger generations, they're more and more concerned about sustainability, and so from a customer point of view, customers are demanding it. Our customers don't want us rocking up in a diesel van to deliver their parcel or their Amazon item, whatever. They want an electric vehicle. So that's a customer demand, and it's going to only increase. Secondly, from the brand point of view, the brand value that you get from having EVs on fleet, you cannot, the amount of coverage we get in the press, the goodwill and all that adds to your brand. And the last thing is, we are constantly filling in tenders for large retailers who want us to deliver their parcels. And there's a whole section around how sustainable is your network and do you use EVs and all that stuff. So, there's a lot of stuff around that it's not just about the price you pay. These are things that you may not be able to apply for a certain tender because you don't have electric vehicles on fleet.
Okay. I would like to continue with a specific question. It's a little bit linked to the tender exercise. So there is a fleet manager who has put a question around the fact that they executed an RFI and invited different OEMs. And they learned that the average mileage is around 241 kilometers WLTP for eLCVs. Our organization, his organization, is modifying, customizing the vehicles. So this will have an effect on the weight and also on the mileage. Now, the manufacturers were not able to estimate the impact on the range after adding an additional 500 kilograms to the vehicle. His first question is, do you agree that suppliers, car manufacturers, leasing companies should be able to also give advice around what is the effect of that on the range? And his second question is, wouldn't it be of much more added value if WLTP would also be based upon LCV 25% load, 50% load, 75% load, 100% load? I don't know who would like to start commenting something.
I'm happy to start off by saying that I absolutely agree that any leasing company should be able to provide the advice and information in regard of that. But obviously, in order to do so, we need the manufacturers to be transparent and open and honest with us. And it's disappointing if the feedback there is that manufacturers are unwilling to give any deviation from their stated range based on load. I mean, at LeasePlan, we have our own internal kind of calculation that we would apply, what we believe is a reduction in range based on payload, etc., and what's carried in the vehicle. But no, we should absolutely advise and be able to do it. But that's where we need the support of our OEM manufacturer partners as well.
Okay, Garrett, perhaps a comment?
Yeah, we haven't had any issues in relation to that. We've been happy with the range that we've been told that we can have, and we've had no issues at range on our network because it's all in the planning. We work with LeasePlan to, we're going to put them into a certain city. These are the distances. Will they work? Yes, no. And so we haven't had any issues in that regard.
A question regarding the duration. Is it correct that now with your eLCVs, the duration is longer than with your ICE LCVs or not?
Is that
what do you mean?
Garrett? Sorry.
Do you keep them longer within the company before that they go back to LeasePlan?
Yeah. Well, we haven't got them that long yet, so we haven't. But our intention would be, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you think would then be how much longer? Let's say, is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? 5 years?
I can't recall at the when doing the evaluation, but I think it was a couple of years, at least 2 years longer than the diesel, because again, there's less moving parts. They have a longer life cycle. There's no gearboxes or anything like that, so they're a dream that way.
Okay. Perhaps an important one is also when a fleet manager and his company have decided to go electric, there might be some skepticism from some managers, drivers, employees. How did that work with you, Garrett? What was the first reaction of the employees, and what did you do to make them as comfortable as possible to drive those eLCVs?
Well, it's funny. I remember a couple of years ago when we started on this journey, and I told the operations director, and he was crying, saying, "Just give me a diesel van. You know, that's what I want. You know, it's not going to need to be charged. I can get it fixed. There's no messing. There's no." So that was the initial reaction, and we got a couple of vans in on trial, and they liked them. They're quieter. There isn't this big. People think there's this big enigma with them, that electric van, and it's gonna die, and it's gonna how are you gonna get it serviced, and all these kind of things. But I think we got a few in on trial. The staff love them, as I said, with the thing saying that they're quieter. I'm less stressed out driving. I go home in the evening and I actually feel a little bit better because I'm, maybe it's the fumes. I don't know what it is. But as we've got the vans in, they absolutely love them. And my challenge, as I said, was when I first looked at the numbers, I was kind of going, oh my God, this is, on paper, they initially look more expensive. But when you take all of the other things into consideration, which we spoke about, it was a decision that it was the right decision. And, we're going to double our efforts in the next 2 years to get even, get the entire fleet electric within the next couple of years.
Do you also offer driver training?
Yeah, full driver training in relation to how to drive the vehicles. So the only issue we have would be on the HGV network, obviously, where the technology hasn't caught up in relation to trucks. There's a few companies looking at hydrogen, and so we're really trying to look at that at the moment, because obviously that's a big area of carbon emissions for our fleet.
Stephen, could I just add a comment to in response to that question? I would say that one of the reasons that I stipulated within the webinar presentation or I'm an advocate, if you like, for phasing transition. You remember I said don't necessarily decide to transition your entire LCV fleet in one go. If you have key stakeholders within your organization that are slightly reticent, the comments like Garrett received from his ops director. The reason why I suggest sometimes doing a particular depot or a particular business division or a particular application first is that you can gradually bring in the electric LCVs and you can actually compare them in operation to the existing vehicles on the fleet. And by doing so, that's when you start to highlight and show some of these advantages that Garrett was talking about in terms of driver acceptance, driver satisfaction, feedback from your own clients that they prefer seeing your vehicles as electric. And it starts then to almost become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they actually sell themselves. So you can actually demonstrate to the people that the vehicles themselves, once they're in, start to prove themselves to be a worthy addition to the LCV fleet.
Okay. Mark, since when are you heading the LCV unit at LeasePlan?
Well, we've had our central LCV team for getting on for 2.5 to 3 years now. But we've also had our separate LCV divisions and specialist teams in some of the individual European countries for longer than that. But we're now accelerating and ramping up our dedicated LCV teams in the countries across Europe on an ongoing basis now.
What is the biggest error that you see fleet managers making when they want to go eLCV?
I would say that it is probably what I've just referred to about trying to do too much too soon in one go. It can be really daunting, and it can cause fleet managers real sleepless nights, as I'm sure Garrett will be aware of as well. I think if you're able to, as I say, do it in bite-sized chunks, use the support, use the advice of your leasing company or your fleet management company, work with the OEMs. My single piece of advice is don't try and do it or take responsibility of doing it for just completely on your own head. Make it a collaborative process with other stakeholders within your business and the experts in the marketplace to help you.
Can I just add to that in terms of
Yes.
the biggest learning I had or advice I'd give to anybody embarking on this is don't underestimate the chargers. Start, the critical path in those things and what type and where and can you fit them in the yard and whereabouts in the yard and all of that. That can be, you could say, oh, I want 50 electric vehicles and I'm going to put them in a certain place. And then your electricity supply into the site mightn't be sufficient. That could take you 6 months, So map all that out as a fleet manager, and ultimately you want the chargers in, the right type of charger, and then the vehicles afterwards.
Okay. And if you could do one thing, if you could do it over again, Garrett, the complete exercise, what would you have been doing differently?
Nothing really. I think I'm happy with the what we've done. I think just in our industry, I think we've had 100% increase in parcels in the last year with people doing online shopping. So from my point of view, I probably would have bought some bigger electric vehicles. So but that's fine. We just swapped them around and stuff like that. But that's the only thing I'd say is to buy big.
Okay. Thank you very much. We need to end this learning webinar here. Thank you very much to Mark Lovett for your expertise, and also to Garrett Bridgeman for your case study and sharing your best practices. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to continue, of course, our series of webinars. So this one was with LeasePlan, and we thank them also for their support. Then let's have a look. Tomorrow we have a deep dive webinar where we will talk about the total cost of ownership supported by Fleet Logistics, and we end on Friday with a webinar about maximizing LCV utilization through flexibility supported by Sixt. Then I would like also to mention that you can fill in the poll questions that we have foreseen in the tool. So if you go to event, there you will have a short satisfaction survey with 1 or 2 poll questions. It would be nice if you can complete those questions so that based on the answers, we can also further improve our knowledge around our webinars. And finally, I would like to thank all our sponsors for organizing the Fleet Week together with us. And I hope to see you tomorrow in our next webinar in the Fleet Week about commercial fleets. Thank you and bye-bye.